Gently, you're pre-diabetic. The room gently, you're pre-diabetic. The room was quiet. The air conditioner hummed softly above us. Outside the window, I could see people walking past the clinic. Some of them were holding coffee. Some of them were laughing. Life was moving as usual. But inside that small white room, time slowed down. Pre-diabetic, not diabetic, not sick. Not in danger, just almost. I nodded as if I understood. I asked a few calm questions. What does that mean? Is it serious? What should I do? He explained it in a steady voice. My blood sugar was higher than normal. Not high enough for diabetes, but high enough to be a warning. It's reversible, he said, if you make changes now. If you make changes now. The sentence stayed in my mind. On the way home, I did not turn on the radio. I just drove in silence, pre-diabetic. And the word felt strange. I had always thought of myself as generally healthy. I did not smoke. I did not drink much. I went to work every day. I paid my bills. I took care of my family. I was responsible. But I was also tired, always tired. I woke up tired. I needed coffee to feel normal. I craved something sweet in the afternoon. I told myself it was because I worked hard. In my 30s, I could skip sleep and still function. In my 40s, I could ignore small pains. Now, in my 50s, it's my body was whispering. And I had been too busy to listen. Too busy answering emails. Too busy meeting deadlines. Too busy worrying about other people's needs. Somewhere between breakfast meetings and late-night snacks, between convenience food and I'll exercise next week, my health had slowly changed, not dramatically, quietly. That evening, I stood in my kitchen. I opened the refrigerator. There was leftover cake from the weekend, sweet yogurt, sugary drinks, white bread, when processed snacks, food that made life easier, food that saved time, food that comforted me after long days. I realized something uncomfortable. I knew these were not the best choices, but I had told myself, I don't have time to think about this. I had time to work overtime. I had time to scroll on my phone. I had time to worry about the future, but I did not have time to notice my own body. Pre-diabetic, it did not feel like a crisis. There was no hospital bed. For years, I sat at the dining table, and for years, I sat at the dining table and tried to remember the last time I moved my body just for joy. Not rushing, not multitasking, just walking, breathing, feeling alive. I could not remember. Even my meals were rushed. Breakfast in the car, lunch at my desk, dinner while watching the news. I was feeding my schedule, not my health. The doctor had said, if you change now, you can prevent diabetes. Prevent. The word gave me hope, but it also gave me responsibility. Because prevention requires attention. It requires slowing down. And I had built my entire adult life around speed. Speed at work, speed at eating, speed at solving problems. But the body does not respond well to speed forever. It keeps a quiet record, every sugary drink, every night of short sleep, every week without movement, not to punish us, but to remind us that we are not machines, that we are living systems, that we need care. That night, I did something small. I did not throw away all the food. I did not promise to become a different person overnight. I simply poured a glass of water, and I drank it slowly. It felt symbolic, simple, calm, intentional. For the first time in years, I was not rushing. I was thinking, not about deadlines, not about money, not about what others expected from me, but about my blood, about my heart, about the quiet signals inside me. I realized something else. Being busy had become my identity. When people asked how I was, I proudly said, busy, as if busy meant important, as if busy meant valuable. But busy had also meant distracted. Distracted from my own needs, distracted from the slow changes happening inside my body. Pre-diabetic. The word was not an ending. It was an invitation to pay attention, an invitation to choose differently, an invitation to care for myself before something irreversible happened. That night, before sleeping, I placed my phone on the bedside table. I turned off the light, and in the darkness, I placed my hand on my chest. My heart was beating steadily. It had been beating for me through stress, through late nights, through rushed meals, through years of, I'll take care of it later. I whispered quietly, I hear you now. For the first time in a long time, I was not too busy to notice. The next morning felt different. Nothing in my house had changed. The same kitchen, the same clock on the wall, the same quiet street outside. But something inside me was more awake. For years, my mornings had been automatic. Wake up, check my phone, scan emails, rush to shower, quick breakfast, coffee in a travel cup, movement without awareness. That morning, I did not reach for my phone. I lay still for a moment. I noticed the weight of my body on the mattress. I noticed my breathing, slow, steady. I tried to remember what the doctor had said. Your numbers are higher than normal. It's reversible. If you make changes now, reversible. The word felt like a second chance. In the kitchen, I stood in front of the cupboard. My usual breakfast was simple: white toast, butter, jam, and strong coffee. Sweet, fast, comforting. I reached for the bread. Then I paused. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had not asked in years. What does my body need? Not what is easy, not what is fast, not what I feel like eating, but what does my body need? The question felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. I closed the cupboard. I opened the refrigerator. There were eggs, vegetables, plain yogurt, some apples. Food I usually ignored because it required effort. I sliced an apple. The sound of the knife against the cutting board felt louder than usual. I scrambled 2 eggs. I sat down at the table. No television, no phone, no emails. Just breakfast. It felt strangely slow. I noticed the taste, the texture, the warmth. It was not dramatic. It was not a perfect, healthy lifestyle. It was simply more intentional. After breakfast, I looked at my schedule. Back-to-back meetings, deadlines, calls, the same busy life. But I added something small, a 20-minute walk. Not to lose weight, not to prove anything, just to move. At 4 p.m., when I would normally reach for something sweet, I stood up instead. My body felt heavy. My mind felt tired. The old habit whispered, you deserve a treat. The new awareness whispered, you deserve care. I chose to step outside. The air was warm. People were walking their dogs. A child was riding a bicycle. An elderly couple was sitting on a bench. Life, moving gently. As I walked, I realized how disconnected I had been from my own body. I had treated it like a tool, something to push, something to demand from, something to ignore until it complained loudly. Prediabetes was not a loud complaint. It was a quiet signal, and I almost missed it. Halfway through the walk, I felt my heart beating faster, not dangerously, just working. I placed my hand lightly on my chest, still steady, still faithful. It had carried me through decades of stress, through promotions, through raising children, through sleepless nights, and I had rewarded it with convenience food and constant pressure. There was no guilt in that moment, only clarity. That evening, I searched for information. Not extreme diets, not miracle cures, just simple facts. What is blood sugar? How does food affect it? How does stress affect it? How does sleep matter? I learned that lack of sleep can raise blood sugar, that chronic stress can affect insulin, that sitting too long can change how the body processes glucose. It was not only about sugar, it was about lifestyle. And my lifestyle had been built around urgency, urgent emails, urgent meetings, urgent responsibilities. But my health had never felt urgent. Until now. I did not tell many people at first. I was not ashamed, but I needed time to understand it myself. That week, I noticed patterns. Around 3 p.m., my energy dropped. After heavy meals, I felt sleepy. When I slept less than 6 hours, I craved sugar more. These were not new experiences. They were old signals I had ignored. I began to write them down. Simple notes. Felt tired after white rice. Better energy after walking. Slept 7 hours. Felt clearer. For the first time, I was studying my own life, not through numbers alone, but through awareness. One evening, my family ordered takeout, fried food, sugary drinks, dessert, the familiar comfort. I hesitated. I did not want to become extreme. I did not want to isolate myself, so I made a quieter choice, smaller portion, water instead of soda, a few bites of dessert instead of the whole slice. It was not perfect, but it was conscious, and that felt powerful. I realized something important. For years, I believed change had to be dramatic, all or nothing, strict or careless, success or failure. But maybe real change is quieter than that. Maybe it looks like one better breakfast, one short walk, one extra hour of sleep, one glass of water, one mindful choice, not punishment, not fear, just respect. By the end of the week, nothing dramatic had happened. My weight had not changed. My life was still busy. My responsibilities were still there. But I felt different. Less rushed when eating, more aware of my body, slightly calmer. The diagnosis had not broken me. It had slowed me down. And slowing down was something I had resisted for years. Because slowing down felt like weakness. Now I was beginning to see it differently. Slowing down was listening, listening to hunger, listening to fatigue, listening to stress, listening to quiet warnings before they became loud consequences. One night, as I prepared for bed, I looked at myself in the mirror. I did not see a sick person. I saw someone who'd been trying very hard for a very long time. Someone who had carried responsibilities without complaint. Someone who had forgotten that caring for others also requires caring for oneself. Pre-diabetic. The word no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a turning point. Not dramatic, not frightening, just clear. And for the first time in many years, I was no longer too busy to notice. 2 weeks passed. Nothing dramatic changed. There was no sudden transformation, no perfect routine, no inspirational music playing in the background of my life. There were still deadlines, still traffic, still responsibilities waiting for me every morning. But there was also something new, awareness. And awareness changes everything. I began to notice how often I ate without hunger. Not physical hunger, emotional hunger. After a stressful meeting, after an uncomfortable conversation, after reading bad news. My first instinct was not to breathe. It was to snack. Sugar had been my quiet reward, my small comfort, my private relief. I had never called it stress eating. I had called it deserving a break. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting day, I stood in front of the vending machine at work. I stared at the familiar options: chocolate bars, cookies, sweet drinks. My hand almost moved automatically. But then I paused, not because of fear, not because of shame, but because I was curious. What am I really feeling right now? I closed my eyes for a moment, tension in my shoulders, tightness in my chest, a heavy mind. I was not hungry. I was overwhelmed. For years, I had confused those two feelings. Instead of buying chocolate, I walked outside. The sky was gray, the air slightly humid. I stood there for 5 minutes, just breathing. The craving softened, not completely, but enough. That small moment felt like a quiet victory, not against food, but against unconscious habits. At home, I started reading food labels, something I had never done before. Sugar was everywhere, in bread, in sauces, oh, and healthy yogurt. In cereal, I believed was good for me. I felt a wave of frustration. Why is it so easy to eat poorly? Because it is convenient, because it is cheap, because it is fast. And my life had been built around convenience, cost, and speed. Changing my habits meant changing my rhythm. And that was harder than changing my grocery list. I began cooking more at home. Simple meals, grilled vegetables, brown rice, fish, beans, soup. Nothing complicated. But cooking required time. Time I used to give entirely to work. At first, I felt impatient. Standing in the kitchen felt inefficient. I could be answering emails. I could be finishing tasks. I could be being productive. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Cooking became quiet therapy, the sound of chopping vegetables, the smell of garlic in a warm pan, the slow simmer of soup. It forced me to be present. It forced me to slow down. And in slowing down, I began to see how fast I had been living. Sleep was the next challenge. For years, I slept 5 or 6 hours a night. I wore exhaustion like a badge of honor. I'll sleep when things calm down, I used to say. Things never calm down. So I decided to protect my sleep. No phone after 10 p.m., no late night emails, no news in bed. The first nights felt uncomfortable. Silence can be loud when you are not used to it. My mind wanted stimulation, scrolling, checking, refreshing. Instead, I lay in the dark, listening to my breathing. Gradually, sleep deepened, and something subtle shifted. When I slept 7 or 8 hours, my cravings were weaker the next day. My mind was clearer, my patience stronger. I realized how connected everything was: food, stress, sleep, movement. Prediabetes was not just about sugar, it was about balance. And my life had been out of balance for years. One evening, my daughter asked me why I was walking every day. I hesitated, and then I told her. The doctor said my blood sugar is a little high. She looked worried. Are you sick? I shook my head. No, but I need to take better care of myself. She nodded slowly. Then she said something that stayed with me. I'm glad you are. Not, I'm scared. Not, that's bad. Just simple relief. I realized my health was not only mine. My habits were being watched, learned, copied. If I treated my body like an afterthought, what message was I sending? That productivity matters more than health? That being busy matters more than being well? I did not want that lesson to continue. At my next doctor appointment, I felt different walking into the clinic, still calm, but more engaged. When he reviewed my numbers, he smiled slightly. Some improvement, he said. Keep going. Some improvement. It was not dramatic, but it was proof. Proof that small changes matter. Proof that awareness works. Proof that it was not too late. Driving home, I felt something I had not expected. Gratitude. Gratitude that my body had warned me early. Gratitude that I had listened, gratitude that change was still possible. For years, I had believed strength meant pushing through, ignoring fatigue, ignoring stress, ignoring discomfort. Now I was learning a different definition. Strength could also mean adjusting, pausing, choosing differently. Prediabetes had not forced me into panic, it had invited me into responsibility. And responsibility, when accepted gently, can feel empowering. That night, as I prepared dinner, I noticed my movements were slower, not lazy, intentional. I was not trying to become perfect. I still had dessert sometimes. I still had busy days. I still felt stress. But I was no longer asleep inside my own life. I was paying attention. And perhaps that was the most important change of all. Because illness often grows in neglect, and healing often begins in awareness. The doctor's words had been simple. You're pre-diabetic. At first, they felt like a warning. Now they felt like a turning point. Not a dramatic one, not a frightening one. Just a quiet moment that asked me a question. Will you keep rushing, or will you finally notice? A month later, the changes no longer felt new. They felt normal. Not easy, but normal. The morning walks were no longer something I had to force. At first, I walked because I was afraid of numbers rising, afraid of future complications, afraid of becoming officially diabetic. Now I walked because I liked how it felt, the quiet streets, the rhythm of my steps, the steady breathing. It became less about prevention and more about presence. One morning, as I walked past a small park, I noticed an elderly man doing slow stretches. His movements were careful, deliberate. He was not in a hurry. No phone, no headphones, no visible pressure, just a body moving with respect. I realized something. For years, and I had treated my body like an employee, demanding, pushing, expecting performance. Now I was beginning to treat it like a partner, listening, supporting, cooperating. The shift was subtle, but powerful. At work, I also started making small adjustments. Instead of sitting for hours without moving, I stood up every hour. I stretched my shoulders, rolled my neck, took a few deep breaths. At first, it felt awkward. People noticed. "You're exercising at work now?" Someone joked. I smiled. "Just trying to stay healthy." The comment was light, but inside I felt something firm. I was no longer embarrassed to prioritize my health. For a long time, I believed taking care of myself was selfish, that my role was to provide, to perform, to produce. Health was something you fixed when it broke, not something you protected daily. Prediabetes had changed that belief. It showed me that health is not automatic, it is maintained. One evening, I opened an old photo album. Photos from 10 years ago. In many pictures, I was holding food, cake at celebrations, large restaurant meals, sugary drinks at gatherings. Food had always been connected to joy, to family, to comfort, to success. There was nothing wrong with that. But somewhere along the way, celebration became routine, indulgence became habit, and habit became consequence. I did not feel regret. I felt understanding. I had used food to manage stress, to reward effort, to soften exhaustion. It had worked until it didn't. That realization brought compassion instead of blame. Blame would not heal me. Awareness would. Another change came slowly. I began saying no, not dramatically, not rebelliously, but clearly. When extra tasks were offered at work, I paused before agreeing. Did I truly have the capacity, or was I saying yes out of habit? For years, I equated saying yes with being valuable, but constant yes had created constant stress, and constant stress had affected my body. The connection became clear. Stress raises cortisol. Cortisol affects blood sugar. Chronic pressure becomes physical. My body had not betrayed me. It had responded to my lifestyle. So I adjusted my lifestyle. One Saturday afternoon, instead of working through emails, I sat in the living room with the book. No productivity goal, no deadline, just reading. At first, guilt appeared. You should be doing something useful. But then another voice answered. Rest is useful. Peace is useful. Longevity is useful. The old version of me believed health was about diet alone. Now I understood it was about rhythm, how I eat, how I sleep, how I move, how I manage stress, how I speak to myself. Even my self-talk began to change. Before, when I craved something sweet, I would think, you have no discipline. Now I asked, what do you need right now? Sometimes the answer was still dessert, but often it was water, or rest, or a short walk, or simply a pause. The numbers at my next checkup improved again. Not perfect, but lower. The doctor nodded. You're on the right path. On the right path. The phrase felt meaningful. Because this was not a temporary diet, it was a direction, a shift in how I lived. One evening, I sat quietly after dinner. No television, no scrolling, just silence. I thought about how close I had been to ignoring the warning. If I had delayed the appointment, if I had dismissed the fatigue, if I had told myself, I'm just getting older, the outcome might have been different. Pre-diabetes had arrived quietly, without pain, without emergency, just numbers on a paper. And yet it carried a powerful message. Slow down, pay attention, choose intentionally. I realized something else. Being too busy had been my shield. If I was busy, I did not have to feel stressed deeply. I did not have to examine habits. I did not have to question imbalance. And busyness protected me from reflection, but it also protected unhealthy patterns. Now I was less busy, not because life changed dramatically, but because I changed how I move through it. More pauses, more breathing, more awareness. My life still looks similar from the outside. Same job, same responsibilities, same home. But inside, it felt steadier, lighter, more conscious. Prediabetes was not a dramatic illness. It was a gentle alarm, and I am grateful it rang softly. Because soft alarms give you time to adjust, time to learn, time to heal. That night, before bed, I drank a glass of water, the same simple act from the first week, but now it felt less symbolic, more natural. I turned off the lights, lay down, and listened to my heartbeat, still steady, still patient, still with me. This time, I did not whisper, I hear you now. Because listening was no longer new. It had become a habit. 3 months later, I returned to the clinic. The waiting room looked the same. Soft chairs, muted television, quiet conversations. But I did not feel the same. The first time I sat here, I felt surprised. The second time, I felt cautious. This time, I felt calm. Not confident in a dramatic way, just steady. When the nurse called my name, I stood up slowly. I had not become a different person in 3 months. I still had busy days. I still felt stress. I still made imperfect choices. But I was no longer living on autopilot. That alone felt like progress. The doctor entered the room with my results. He smiled before speaking. Your numbers are back in the normal range. Normal. Such a simple word. Yet it carried so much relief. I did not cheer. I did not cry. I simply exhaled. A long, quiet breath I did not realize I had been holding for months. It's working, he added. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. That sentence meant more to me than the improved numbers, because what I was doing was not extreme. I had not followed a strict diet. I had not punished myself. I had not transformed overnight. I had simply paid attention. On the drive home, I thought about the first day he said, "You're pre-diabetic." At that time, I heard a warning. Now, I see it as a gift. Not because prediabetes is pleasant, but because it arrived early, quietly, gently enough for me to change direction. I began to understand something deeper. Health is not built in emergencies. It is built in ordinary days, in the choice to walk instead of sit, in the decision to sleep instead of scroll, in the pause before reaching for sugar, in the courage to say no to unnecessary stress. These moments are small, almost invisible, but repeated daily, they shape a life. I also realized that the biggest change was not physical, it was mental. I no longer wear busy as a badge of honor. When someone asks how I am, I do not automatically say busy. Sometimes I say balanced or taking things one step at a time. That shift feels important because busyness once gave me identity. Now awareness does. I still enjoy food. I still celebrate with cake on birthdays. I still share meals with family, but I eat slower. I taste more. I stop when I am satisfied. Food is no longer my escape from stress. It is nourishment, and sometimes enjoyment. There is a difference. My walks continue. Not every day is perfect. Sometimes rain interrupts. Sometimes meetings run late. But I return to them, not out of fear, out of respect. Respect for a body that works quietly for me every second. Respect for a heart that beats without complaint. Respect for blood that carries energy through me. I used to think strength meant endurance, working long hours, ignoring fatigue, sacrificing sleep. Now I see strength differently. Strength is listening early. Strength is adjusting before breaking. Strength is choosing prevention over pride. One evening, I sat with my family at dinner. No television, no phones, just conversation, laughter, stories, ordinary life. I realized something simple. If my health had continued declining, these moments might have changed. Energy affects mood. Blood sugar affects patience. Fatigue affects connection. Taking care of myself was not selfish. It protected these quiet evenings. It protected presence. It protected time. Prediabetes forced me to notice what truly matters. Not endless productivity, not constant urgency, but sustainable living. Living in a way that allows tomorrow to exist comfortably. I sometimes think about how easy it would have been to ignore the diagnosis, to say, it's just slightly high. I'll deal with it later. I'm too busy right now. Later can become years, and years can become consequences. Instead, I chose now. Not dramatically, just consistently. If you are listening to this story and you feel generally fine, but constantly tired, if you tell yourself you are too busy to cook, too busy to walk, too busy to sleep, pause, not in fear, in curiosity. What small signal might your body be sending? What quiet message are you postponing? You do not need a crisis to change. Sometimes you only need awareness. The day my doctor said, "You're pre-diabetic," I thought I was hearing bad news. In truth, I was being invited to wake up, to slow down, to notice, to care. And perhaps that is the real lesson. Health does not demand perfection. It asks for attention. It asks for small daily respect. It asks us not to be too busy to notice our own lives. Tonight, as I prepare for bed, I feel steady, not perfect, not transformed, just aligned. My phone rests on the table. The lights are soft. My breathing is calm. My heart beats quietly in my chest, and this time I do not feel regret. I feel gratitude. Gratitude that I listened, gratitude that it was not too late, gratitude that change can begin in something as small as a sentence. You're pre-diabetic. Sometimes the gentlest warnings create the most meaningful awakenings. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, take a quiet moment tonight. Drink a glass of water slowly. Take one deep breath and ask yourself, am I too busy to notice? Or am I ready to begin?